Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Bivol's manager says that Gilberto Ramirez bout is possible for 2020. The article reads, Ramirez is now #1 ranked in position for a crack at the WBO title at 175. The belt recently became vacant after Canelo Alvarez dropped the title. The #2 ranked contender is Umar Salamov. It remains to be seen if Ramirez and Salamov will face each other for the now open strap. The possibility of a fight with Gilberto Ramirez in 2020, this fight is interesting to us and the fans. If this fight became a unification for the WBA and WBO titles, it would attract a lot of attention, said Kornilov to TOS. What do I think about this news? Well, let's put it this way. You know, Dmitry Bivol, as a fighter, as a champion, really isn't a guy that you can complain about. I mean, he isn't. If you know anything about his record, and you know anything about the light heavyweight division, you'll know that this is a guy who's fought anyone from Felix Valera, to Sullivan Barrera, to Isaac Chalemba, to Trent Broadhurst, to Joe Smith Jr., to Jean Pascal. The same Jean Pascal that just upset what was then an undefeated Marcus Brown. Well, Bivol's been there and done that with that guy. So, Dmitry really isn't a guy that you can complain about. But when it comes to Zurdo, there is a demand, a want, a desire for his campaign at 175 to be a lot more eventful than his campaign was at 168. I understand that the politics of boxing may have stopped Zurdo from being a part of certain fights because certain belts were on certain sides of the street. So it's not all Zurdo's fault that his reign at 168 was rather quiet.
And it was.
But now that he's at 175, there's really no excuse for things not to pick up, for things not to get serious. I'd have to say that for both Bivol and Zurdo, if they locked horns with each other in what could be a unification match, provided that Zurdo wins what is now the vacant WBO title, and in all likelihood he will.
Yeah.
He's in a prime position to pick it up. I said this weeks and months ago, okay, that Canelo's not going to keep that belt. He's going to let it go. And when he does, Zurdo is in the prime position to pick it up.
It looks like he's going to.
But once again, you know, for Zurdo, for Bivol, a fight between them would arguably be the biggest fight, the biggest name that either guy has faced so far. But you really can't levy the same critiques, the same criticisms, observations when it comes to Bivol's resume than when you look over at Zurdo's, because comparatively, Bivol really has been facing formidable fighters, a lot more formidable than the guys that Zurdo has been fighting, and Bivol doesn't even have half the fights. He became a champion much sooner, stepped up in competition much sooner, whereas when it comes to Zurdo Ramirez, the most formidable guy that he ever fought in the entirety of his resume, and this guy's got a lot of pro fights.
Been around a long time.
Zurdo Ramirez has been around since 2009. He's got 40 professional contests. 40, okay? 26 knockouts. This guy's been around a long time. Yet for all that time that he's been around, the most formidable guy that he's fought in 40 professional contests really is Jesse Hart. Bivol doesn't have half the fights that Zurdo has, but he has faced an overall better quality of competition. So there is some emphasis for Zurdo in particular to pick things up, you know, that, okay, you know, you're at 175 now, and now that you're at 175, it's not like the way it was before. Two of those world titles are right there on your side of the street with Artur Beterbiev. Vosdik is still there. Elator Alvarez is also there. And Bivol, who's on another side of the street, he's on the matchroom side of things, he's expressing an interest in fighting you as well. So even if it's not Bivol that Zurdo ends up fighting, if and when he gets that WBO title, let's say it's Artur Beterbiev, I'll take it, okay? I will take it. If it's Vosdik, if it's Elator Alvarez, I'll take it, okay? Because it's about time for things to start picking up. And it's a funny thing when it comes to Zurdo, because Zurdo Ramirez is of Mexican descent, and you would have thought that a fighter that has that much pro experience who is of Mexican descent, especially in this market, you would have thought that their name would have grown more by now. 40 professional contests, something like 10 or 11 years as a professional. Yet Zurdo Ramirez is a name that you only hear uttered in closely knit, hardcore boxing circles, when usually a Mexican fighter usually struggle to get that backing that makes them a marquee attraction, makes them a pay-per-view star. It's really not as hard as it seems for a Mexican fighter than it is for other fighters. But if this hasn't happened for Zurdo, if it hasn't happened yet, after all this time, I think his quality of competition does have a lot to do with it. The Mexican fans, they're not dumb. They're not just going to get behind anybody. They want to know that a guy's repping it right. That he's going in there and he's fighting the good fighters. He's having the good fights. And I understand if the politics of boxing may have prevented Zurdo from having those kinds of fights when he was at 168, but he really doesn't have that excuse anymore.
He don't.
You know that Zurdo only fought once this entire year, back in May, against Tommy Karpensi in what was Zurdo's light heavyweight debut. And Tommy Karpensi's a journeyman. I mean, anybody could see that. Yeah. Okay, there are much more interesting options out there for Gilberto Ramirez to make a splash at 175 than Tommy Karpensi. I mean, there are. Look at who Jesse Hart's fought so far as a light heavyweight and who he's about to fight. He already fought Sullivan Barrera. He nicked it. He just made it past him, but better still, he had the fight. And now Jesse Hart's about to fight Joe Smith Jr., one of the bigger, more dangerous punchers in the entire weight class. These are the guys that Jesse Hart's keeping busy with. So what's stopping Zurdo from decorating his resume with some who's who names at 175? Hopefully 2020 will be a more eventful year for Zurdo, because I reiterate, he only fought once. And hopefully 175 will be a more interesting weight class for him than 168 was. And that's because, you can only blame it on the rain, but for so long. After a while, the blame will be assigned to Zurdo that, okay, when you were a champion, James DeGale, he had the IBF, and David Benavidez, he had the WBC. They're on the PBC side of things, and we all know the politics of boxing prevented, those kinds of fights from happening. George Groves, he won the WBA title, subsequently joined the World Boxing Super Series. He was all wrapped up in that. So if those fights didn't happen, okay, fine.
Fuck it.
But, you don't have that excuse at 175. You don't have it.
Nope.
So things need to happen. They need to start happening. That's all I'm saying. Moving on. The viewership numbers for this past weekend's junior middleweight title fight between Tony Harrison, the then champion, and Jermell Charlo, the then challenger, in what was their rematch. The viewership numbers are in, and they're fantastic. 2.2 million people tuned in to see Jermell Charlo win his belt back from a very formidable, very game Tony Harrison, albeit a bit too cavalier. I reiterate, I've said this many times since the fight, I think it was cockiness that costed Tony Harrison the belt. I think that he could have took his foot off the gas a bit and cruised to a decision had he fought a more defensively responsible fight, not opened up as much, stayed in character as what he is and what he's good at. And that's being a pure boxer. He was having his way with Jermell. He was having a lot of success, opened up a bit too much, and got caught. It is what it is. It happens.
It happened to him.
And these really are great viewership numbers, I've said this already, that in order for a PBC fighter to get the maximum amount of exposure, to become known with a mainstream audience, well...
Fight on Fox.
That really is limited to who's fighting on Fox. Because if you look over at Jermell's brother Jamal's numbers, for what was the Dennis Hogan fight, which happened 1 or 2 weeks ago, it's abysmal, man. It's terrible. 249,000, I think that's the number of people that tuned in to see this thing. That accents that,
Showtime.
Fighting there on that particular network, on that particular platform, does not lend itself to growing a fighter's name, marquee value, and that further accents what I've been saying. I just don't know for how much longer Showtime is going to be able to stay in the running, stay in the business of boxing, given the kind of numbers that they're putting up. Because the higher-ups at Showtime, okay, the guys above Stefan Espinoza, they're looking at this, and they got to be telling themselves, why are we spending money on this content when this is the only kind of viewership it's getting us, okay? We might have to walk away from the sport of boxing. Now, we got this Gervonta Davis versus Yuriorkis Gamboa fight coming up before the year is out. It's going to be on Showtime. And you get the sense that if this fight were on Fox, it would probably do well over 1 million views. It could. It's not the worst fight I've ever seen Gervonta Davis involved in all honesty. And you guys know, I don't pull any punches on Gervonta Davis or his myriad of cherry picks. I don't. But comparatively, for a maiden voyage into what is the 135-pound division, Gamboa is not a bad choice.
It's not.
I don't have any illusions about the fight. I think that Yuriorkis Gamboa is very much past it. I'm of the opinion that, when Gamboa fought Sosa really deserved to get the decision in that fight. He should have got it. Better still, Gamboa is a better choice than Cuellar was for Gervonta Davis. Cuellar, who hadn't fought in roughly 2 years, was coming off a loss at 126, somehow gets a world title opportunity at 130. It is what it is. I've seen worse opponent choices for Gervonta Davis than Gamboa. I don't have any illusions about the fight. I don't think it's a big event, but it's decent given the circumstances that Davis is going to 135. This is his first fight there. Okay, fine. Whatever. But you get the sense that the home for a fight like this, it really should have been Fox. And Davis has been fighting exclusively on Showtime. We all know that Leonard Ellaby, the people over there at the Money Team, the PBC, those guys, they want to make Davis into a star. They want him to be a marquee attraction, a pay-per-view attraction, without pay-per-view worthy opponents, right? They're not putting him in there with Lomachenko, right?
Right.
I'm not holding my breath to see Davis versus Teofimo Lopez, or even Davis versus Comey. I'm not holding my breath to see Davis versus anybody who's all in their prime. But they still want to make him into a pay-per-view star, right? Okay, well, you're not going to be able to do that by having him fight exclusively on Showtime. You're actually hindering his growth, his ability to continue to grow with a mainstream audience by having him fight exclusively on Showtime. At minimum, I'll say that a Davis versus Gamboa fight on Fox would probably do much better numbers than it would on Showtime. Yet, as it stands, Davis has been fighting exclusively on Showtime. I think that the Davis versus Gamboa fight will probably do better numbers than the Charlo versus Hogan fight did, but as far as numbers go, it's not going to be nothing earth-shattering. It's not going to be nothing to write home about. You think about how Showtime means to kick off the next year with the Danny Garcia versus Ivan Redkach fight. Okay, what kind of viewership numbers do you expect to get with that fucking thing? Okay? That's a pretty fucking obvious cherry pick. Do you realize Danny Garcia is on the same side of the street as most of the top 10 guys in the division? A Danny Garcia versus Yordenis Ugas fight, for example, that would have made more sense. Yordenis Ugas is a top 10 guy. He's coming off a big win over Omar Figueroa. Undefeated Omar Figueroa. Instead of having those two guys fight each other, what do? They got Danny Garcia fighting a guy that Tevin Farmer beat a couple of years ago. And then they've got Ugas fighting Mike Dallas on FS1. Who the hell's that guy? You go from fighting Omar Figueroa on the undercard of a pay-per-view fight, big pay-per-view fight, to fighting Mike Dallas on FS1?
The fuck?
Look, I can tell you that Danny Garcia's preserving himself for either a Pacquiao fight or a Spence fight. That much is obvious. But for a guy who only fought once in 2019, and it was against a little guy that they brought up to welterweight, in Adrian Granados, for you to sit on your hands the rest of the year, turn around and fight a Ivan Redkach?
Come on.
I think there was plenty of room, plenty of time there for maybe Danny to have a fight with a Ugas before this year is out, and then kick off the following year with a Redkach fight. You have a formidable fight with a formidable fighter, and then you take a lighter touch. Now, Danny went from a lighter touch to another lighter touch. It's a PBC model, man. It is what it is. And because this is how Danny Garcia has been spending his time, right? Because this is what he's been doing, and because there's more of a demand for a Garcia versus Crawford, it's more of a demand for a fight like that, but because that's not the fight that he's having, he's fighting this Ivan Redkach guy,
How many?
How many people do you think are interested in seeing that? What kind of viewership do you expect to get with these brazen cherry picks? But back to the point. Jamel and Tony, they did great numbers. The fight had good build-up. The shit-talking of Tony Harrison certainly made that an intriguing affair, an intriguing situation. You wondered that Tony Harrison hadn't got under Jamel's skin enough that maybe lightning could strike twice. Maybe he can hold on to that belt. I mean, the build-up for this thing, it really did lend itself to making it an intriguing affair. It did. And the aesthetic of the fight was actually pleasing. I'm not a fan of the PBC business model or their company, but that really was an entertaining fight from start to finish. And that formula, it's just better suited for Fox. Their fighters are better suited just fighting on Fox instead of wasting their time on Showtime. And, just speaking of that, what talent is going to be fighting where in regards to the PBC? It appears that Caleb Plant's next fight has landed on Fox, and he's going to be squaring off against Germany's own Vincent Feigenbutz on February 15th. And Vincent Feigenbutz, young kid, 24 years old, lots of pro fights, though not lots of world-level experience. I mean, he's got a pro record of 31 wins, 2 losses, with 28 of those 31 wins coming by way of knockout. The kid can punch. I mean, you can look at him and see that. You look at this kid in action, and you get the sense that you can't afford to stand right in front of him. Don't punch with him because he's looking for a shootout. That's what he wants. That's how he goes about fighting the fight. I'd say that, I look at Vincent in action, and he's almost like Ivan Bedenchik minus the legs. Because I'd say that, for what it's worth, Ivan Bedenchik, strong puncher at 140 pounds, he likes to trade the way that Vincent likes to trade. But the difference is, Vincent is a bit of a top-heavy guy, doesn't strike me as having the same athleticism that Ivan has, to where if Ivan's got to track the guy down and pour it on, he'll do that. Whereas Vincent strikes me more as a guy who's been having things his way because he's been fighting in fights where the other guy just stands right in front of him and trades with him. He is looking to get the better of the exchange and then go in for the kill. And don't ever be fooled. There is a difference between having to track the guy down in order to hurt him as opposed to hurting the guy, then pouring it on, which seems to be Vincent Feigenbutz's calling card. Fighting in fights with guys that are going to stand and trade. And last I checked, Caleb Plant is a cut above a guy like that. Oh, he can fight you in the pocket, but he's got the kind of angles, the kinds of upper body movement to where he can stay in that pocket and still be defensible. And you know what? If things are getting too hot in the kitchen, Caleb Plant actually does have a set of legs to fight the fight from the outside behind his jab. My initial impression of the match is that Caleb's actually got everything to win it because in spite of Vincent being a very strong puncher, he's not an educated puncher. He's not the kind of guy who knows how to open up a defensive opponent, knows how to cut the ring off against a moving target. That's just not his MO. And as it stands against Caleb, well, that's going to be the most world-level guy that Vincent has ever faced in over 30 professional contests. If you go from fighting these stationary targets that are going to stand there and trade with you, once you're in there with a guy who's going to offset your aggression with movement, with angles, well, that's a novel sensation, and I don't think that Vincent has had enough professional experience to where he knows how to deal with that and still seal the deal. So I do have Caleb Plant winning that fight. I mean, that's my initial interpretation. This is going to be his second defense of the IBF super middleweight title. It's going down at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee on February 15th, aired on Fox. So keep your eyes peeled for this. Caleb Plant's second defense of the IBF super middleweight crown.